Hello, listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series titled A Break in the Fog. For more information about Molly and her writing, you can visit abreakinthefog.com. But for now, here is Molly Salans. You mentioned that your father suffered or may have suffered from his own form of depression as well. So there's a chance that during these arguments where you don't understand each other, you're both experiencing something with your mental health that is causing you to be unable to.
Absolutely.
Wow, isn't that hindsight is such an interesting thing, isn't it? To look back on things and say, and that makes me wonder about you and your sister now, because you mentioned being resentful of your older sister for being particularly harsh with her um trying to establish boundaries as almost the parent in the household. And I'm sure that she must have also felt resentful of her siblings because she had this role placed onto her when she was just a kid that wanted to be a kid.
By the time I entered really deep therapy, and I think I was 30 years old. And after a time, I was telling my therapist that I was the black sheep. And then after a time, she asked me, after I was telling her story after story about my sister and I, she said, has it ever occurred to you that your older sister may have been depressed too? She said, I want you to, because I was going to school for therapy at the time. And she said, I just want you to look back as if you were the clinician on the two of you, looking at her behavior. What would make her do that? What would cause her? You took it inward, you hated yourself. But depression is about hatred and irritability in kids. What if she was hating the world? So then I began to develop far more compassion toward her. I began to understand that we both grew up in the same chaos, that we were both trying to do the best that we could at the time. And eventually we started to talk with each other about our treatment toward each other and what our household was like. And it was so enlightening that she was very depressed. She was very, very depressed. And we talk about this all the time now, the ways of getting out of that, how to help our kids through it, and what really happened. And it's so fabulous to have it all out in the open.
There must be some fascinating conversations where you're
Yes,
comparing how you both remember things. And
yes,
yeah,
yes.
I imagine that is something new every time you sit down together.
Right. So the in the book, the car game, I don't know if you remember that the two sisters engaged in, that was real. She really
Right.
did do that with me, among other things that I cut out of the story. But one person who read the book said that in order for Wendy to really want to find Clara, they would have had to have been close in childhood. So I had to change that part a little bit. And it was gratifying. I got to relive my childhood with my sister and go, wow, let's change the story of this.
There was a thought I had as well that I don't know if I'm going sort of way off the mark. You've spoken about the difficulties that you had with your mum and how she was somewhat of an absent parent. Is that why you decided to start the book at a point where Clara and Wendy's mum has actually passed away?
So it took me 13 years to write this novel. So it went through a million different renditions.
Wow.
And the first few renditions started from Clara's childhood. And it really showed Anna's absenteeism, her psychosis, and everything else. And then somebody else read the book and said, what if you made this into memory? So that person, so I tried it, I just was trying every suggestion because this was my first endeavor at a novel. I'd never done it before. I have written a book of nonfiction, but never this. So when I worked for years on creating it into memory, it seemed to work better. And so it was suggested that we begin with her gone already. Um, and it seemed to work better than, and the whole reason for, what I'll say is that so much more deeper things came out from the memory than from real time. Yeah, but my mom lived until she was almost 92, and she stayed unhealthy, mentally unhealthy that whole time, and believed she was the healthiest person in the world, and we were all crazy. So she had that up until she died.
I really thought those parts of the book, well, the whole book is I really was engrossed from start to finish, but the parts where you do go back on memories of mum is very interesting, because the first half of the book is kind of like there's this three-person household that's really restrictive, kind of almost cult-like in itself. And the father establishes this really regimented, strict environment that any person would feel like they were suffocating in. Um, but the different perspectives in the chapters from various characters allow you insight into what those individuals are thinking, why that environment exists in the way that it does. So that was really interesting. And it's really interesting to hear that that's nothing like what your house was like as well. Um, how you're able to create such a convincing atmosphere in the book that is like almost the opposite of what you grew up in is quite something. And I was surprised that in the second half of the book there was tumultuous relationships between Wendy, Clara, and their mum, because when you're grieving, I think maybe it's the same as, the summer of love. People think about it with rose tinted glasses. When a person has passed away, maybe we don't think always about the difficulties that we faced with that person when they were here, and we think about what we've lost now that they're gone. But with this situation in the second half of the book, you're like, wow, it was tough when mum was here, and it's still tough now that she's gone.
Yes. Yeah. Um, my mom, looking back on it, she did everything she could. When I think about her, not knowing that she was Jewish until she was 20, growing up in Christmas parades and Easter pageants and dressing up, um, and it's not that she was young in age when she got married, but I think she was sheltered. She grew up with money, and I know that she truly fell in love with my father, but I think she may have been very similar to me, thinking that a man would take care of her, that marriage was her path. And she was more rebellious than that. She really was an artist, and she thought in visualizations and music. She was very knowledgeable about music, very knowledgeable about art, as well as really good at it. And she took piano lessons, and my father was jealous of the piano teacher. So in thinking about it in the past, I can't imagine her life being married to my father. And I think to her, he probably was controlling. And he knew how to relate to us for our kids in a way she did not know how. And I've even thought that she may have suffered postpartum, both when my sister was born and then not even a year and a half later when I was born, to be pregnant right after my sister is born. Um, she may have had postpartum with me too. And I don't think that was a thing. Or if it was, it meant you were hospitalized and you took heavy duty medication. And this was smack in the middle of the 50s, where 50 housewives endured this, and they were expected to take care of the house, the cooking, and the kids. And I don't think my mother had a clue. I don't know if the innate, inborn, I'm going to protect my children thing of motherhood. I don't know that she had that. I'm not really clear. Her heart was in her music and in her art. And I think she was so very needy. She didn't pass that on to us. She tried, she engaged a lot in doing art projects with us, but my oldest sister was the only one that showed any talent. I'll give a plug for my sister. She drew the cover of my book.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. I do. I love it. And reading the book and hearing about Clara with the dancing and then seeing the picture on the front, but then finding out that you don't dance, Molly.
Well, dancing is one of my most favorite things to do.
Right. Okay. Okay. So when you said earlier that you didn't really like weren't career focused, and you weren't really interested in pursuing anything, I thought then, oh, maybe Molly didn't dance, but then of course you do.
No, that's true. Dancing, I thought, well, what if she's a writer or what if she's an artist like my sister and my mother? And I thought, oh my God, if, if I have another life, I'm going to be really gifted at dancing because I love it. I love dancing. And what happened was, my mother, the pianist, my mother, the artist, believed my piano teacher, who was also hers, when he told her I was tone deaf. So she quit. I wasn't tone deaf. I was just having trouble reading music. And she played the piano. I danced all the time when she played the piano. So she put me into the San Francisco Ballet, where all my friends were going. And I was 8 years old. And after maybe I was 9, and we were being measured and whatever for the Nutcracker. So I was very excited. My most favorite, I loved it. So the next week I go into class and 5 or 6 girls, the teacher's really paying attention to them, but she's not paying attention to the rest of us. And I asked her about the Nutcracker after class. She looked up my name and she said, "Oh, sweetheart, you were 2 pounds overweight. You didn't make the cut." So my mother didn't get mad. She just said, "Okay, don't take it, don't take dance anymore." But I absolutely loved it. And so throughout my adult life, I've taken lessons. Whenever I'm at a party, I go for it. But I didn't become the professional dancer that Clara became. That was a dream of mine, Well, what if I could really dance? What if I really went for it regardless? And ballet may have been way too restrictive for me. But then in high school, I took modern dance and enjoyed that a lot more. So that's how all that came about.
It's great to hear you and what how much of Clara is you and how much isn't, and I think it's absolutely awesome to gain this insight. And I noticed throughout the book that there were various themes of loneliness, restriction, teenage angst, ill mental health, paired with what I think everybody experiences, body image, a lot of issues around the way that people feel and look in their own skin. Um, and all of this culminates to Clara's initial experience of this group and Damien. So you've mentioned what it was like for you having your initial meeting with this group, and then there's a part in the book that I just thought was so it was almost funny. So Clara is taken shopping by somebody who says you need to dress like this to find your true self, which is just the opposite, isn't it? You're being told by somebody how to look and what to wear, and this is what you should dress in order to be true to yourself. So I just wondered if you could talk us through your experiences after this initial meeting. Um, what continued to be attractive about the group, what changed over time, and your specific experiences. And then we can talk about how they relate to Clara's experiences.
Okay, so where do I begin with that? Looks were of paramount importance. Wearing jeans to class eventually was not okay. The language, we want you to dress like men and women, not like girls and boys. And that was consistently talked about. I always had a taste for clothes, so I don't believe that anybody ever went shopping for me with me, but I had to stop wearing hippie dresses and Birkenstocks, and I was even encouraged to start wearing makeup, which was something I had refused to do all through high school and college. Never wore makeup. I believe somebody took me shopping for makeup, although I can't really say that was true because I don't remember very clearly, but I had no clue how to wear it. So somebody had to have taught me what to buy and how to put it on. So I didn't mind dressing differently. Looking back on it, my sister and I used to steal my mother's clothes, and we were always playing dress up. So that sort of became a natural, oh, I can get out of these ugly jeans. I never really perhaps took to them to begin with. So I had a baby in the cult. Clara never had children in the cult. I don't know where to begin with this one. So you're asking me for my experiences and how they differed. All right. So in the beginning, it was amazing. And then how did it turn? I think the cult did end up moving to Boston, which is how I got there. It did encourage marriage. And so Michael and I got married. And once it moved to Boston, the Damien figure also moved. And his ex-wife, who I was also close to, we can call her Susan, also moved. So a lot of people I knew were already there. And the whole reason why we moved, which I didn't find out till I was, I realized I was in a cult, was because of the Jim Jones incident. And I've forgotten the names now, but I believe there was a California senator who was shot and killed trying to figure out what was going on. And so what was happening was that everything that smacked of a cult was being investigated by the FBI. And I found out years later that there had been enough ex-members who had complained about this particular cult to the police. There was a record. So the two cult leaders beat it out of California and decided to move to the East Coast. And at the time, they just dismantled the whole cult thing. And I was still engaged to Michael. And in the spring of 79, after the Jim Jones incident and after I think Harvey Milk was assassinated, we we were invited back to a special meeting run by the Damien figure. And he said that the cult leader had handpicked the most special people to re-begin this group on the East Coast, and would we come? So I couldn't wait. I wanted nothing to do with my family. I was getting married. I wanted a whole new life. And my father had grown up in Boston, and I had relatives there. And Michael had gone to school in Boston, and he was thrilled. He had grown up in Brooklyn, New York, so he was thrilled to move. And it was very exciting. It was like, oh, we're special. I bought that hook, line, and sinker. I was probably still depressed at the time, but had some exciting things coming up, so it didn't feel that way. And it was quite a shock for me, although I didn't acknowledge it at the time. Married life was god awful. although nobody told me it would be. And living in Boston became harder. Being in that group, because they were starting a group in Boston and in Manhattan, we spent every spare weekend in Manhattan walking the streets and recruiting people. And it was a god awful experience. It was just draining me. I hated it. And then we'd go to meetings and were chastised for not bringing in enough people and what was wrong with us. And being singled out in a meeting. Um, and it got more and more intense. And like you say, chasing that euphoric experience became the absolute need so that I wasn't kicked out. And um, so, in terms of actual experiences, I don't know that this would be sequential. But every summer, I think it was every summer, if not every other summer, they had a retreat in a different state, like the retreat in Oregon. And they would invite those members who are worthy of going into this retreat. I think it lasted 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. And it is true, we were blindfolded because we were not allowed to see where we were going. So once we flew into the state, we got on a bus and blindfolded for hours to get to the place that we were going to. It was true that no matter if somebody was, quote, an older student, a year, been there a year or longer, no matter what they said, they'd be chastised for it. It is true that we had absolutely no sleep on those retreats. We were up at dawn and worked our butts off, and were in nightly meetings that started at 7 and went till 4 or 5 in the morning, completely deprived of sleep, which of course is on purpose. So we were all, you go 72 hours without sleep and you're declared officially insane at that point in time. There were lots and lots. Everybody was married. Everybody had kids. I don't think, I don't think my daughter was born the first time I went. And the cult leader was like, give your kids sugar, give them twang. You don't have to you don't have to spend a lot of money to give them food. And at the time, we were working our butts off and asked to pay $200 a month to stay in the group. And things were being built on this retreat, free labor, and it was pretty awful. So these all night meetings were nightmares. And it would be a women's meeting and a men's meeting. And the Helen character was off her rocker crazy. And the husband, who I didn't really write about, was a psychopath. He was one of the scariest people I'd ever met in my life. And we believed them hook, line, and sinker. And during the women's meeting, a woman would be singled out for not doing her part. And all of us women were asked to participate in putting her down. So when it came to my time, I had been in the cult 2.5 years, and I did have my child with me. I think Sarah was 2, and she was crying a lot, as all children are. They're very sensitive, and most likely she was picking up on the energy, and I had no sleep. And there was a daycare at the retreat, and I never got to see her. Working in the kitchen, I forget all the chores I had, cleaning cabins people were sleeping in. It was just one thing after another. So I probably never saw her. And during that women's meeting, she wasn't necessarily a mentor. This was Damien's ex-wife. I was very, very close to her, the woman I'm calling Susan. And the cult leader was there, and she started in. She said, Molly, I really think you weren't meant to be a mother. The way your daughter is behaving in the daycare, she's crying a lot, she's tantruming, she's throwing things. You're really doing a lousy job. So from 10 at night until 4 in the morning, by every woman there, I was told that I wasn't meant to be a mother. And that wasn't I lucky, because I had this group of women who could parent my daughter for me. And what was common in this group was that children were swapped all the time. That part was true in the book. The cult leader would just say, you're a lousy mother, your kids belong with this person. And the kids were swapped back and forth, like as if they were, products, things. And because I was so insecure, and because obviously my depression had never left, it was bounding back in leaps and bounds without my knowledge. And I believed, because, being a mom, when somebody says you're not doing something right, especially when your kids are young, it's like, oh, they're probably right. I have no idea what I'm doing. Right. So they were able to work on the most vulnerable part inside me. At that time, I forgot, at that time, Michael had left the cult. And when you leave the group, you're not allowed to talk to the person who left. And I wanted to stay. So he left when she was an infant. I forgot about that part. And I stayed, and I was considered a hero for staying, and that he would come back or that I would meet someone else. And we weren't allowed to talk, but I thought that was nuts. I broke that rule right and left. He was her father, and he adored the baby. So there's no way I was going to keep him out of her life. But in this meeting, by the end of it, they had convinced me that Susan should fly back to Boston with Sarah, that she would look in on Michael to make sure he was a good father. And if she determined that he wasn't, she'd take her. So the cult leader ends up calling Michael at 4 or 5 in the morning. I'm in tears. I'm a wreck. And she says, Susan's going to take Sarah, the baby, home, and Molly is an unfit mother. And we want to make sure you're doing well with Sarah. So Michael knew how to swear. When he was angry, you didn't want to be around him. And I could hear him swearing. I wasn't sitting that far away from the cult leader, but I could hear him just going off. And she hands me the phone, and he said to me, if you're not on the plane with our child, if somebody else is on the plane with our child, I will make sure that the police are at the airport waiting to arrest that person. He said, um, when I come to pick up Sarah, she looks at you, she gives you a really big hug. She comes to me. I've never seen a bruise on her. She's 2, she's going to tantrum, Molly. If you've read any about books of child rearing, of course she's tantruming. What 2-year-old doesn't? She's in a foreign environment. And he said, she's in a shitty fucking environment. Why wouldn't she be? He said, you need to get out of there. So we circumvented that problem, but I was shattered. That shattered me. And you would think I would leave at that time. But what does the cult leader do? A few months later, but she introduces me to a guy who I completely fall in love with. So now everything is redeemed for a little bit of time.
I have to ask you this question, Molly, because it can't possibly be that, and I can cut this part out if it does happen to be true, but it can't possibly be. Was Damien named Alex Horn?
I cannot answer that question.
I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. Oh my goodness me. Oh my goodness me. I am like, on the brink of tears right now. That is absolutely wild. When you know what happened to other people in New York and Boston, and you can trace that back to the two people moving because they were outed as cult leaders to those areas. Oh my gosh, Molly.
So we may have to cut this part out. And I will tell you that I spoke with somebody yesterday because I was on the verge of telling the truth. And he said, you need to get legal counsel. Don't do anything until you have legal counsel.
So I interviewed Spencer Schneider about his experiences with Sharon Gans, and he is a Manhattan lawyer. So I just can't believe I was writing notes when you were talking about the subscription and the secrecy and the shunning of members and the kind of behind closed doors adoptions. And I was thinking in my head that there is no way that this could be the same group. That is absolutely wild.
Well, he told, I reached out to a lawyer today because he told me he wouldn't do it. And he said it would be unsafe to name the group, not because they'll come after me, but because I've called the book fiction. And now I'm saying, well, no, it was actually based on this. But I've also said that it's loosely based on my experiences. And so I don't know what to do with this. This is why I'm seeking legal. It's not necessarily Alex Horn, but somebody else in that same group. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I can't believe that. Wow, I can't believe that.
I can't believe you know about it, but of course you would have interviewed Spencer. Absolutely.
I absolutely cannot believe that. I speak to Spencer every week. He's like a really good friend of mine. We communicate. Yeah, he's a patron. I wrote a review for his book that's in the publication. Yeah, we talk like weekly.
Oh, you're kidding.
That's why I'm so shocked. And that's why a minute ago when you were talking, I was on my phone because I was trying to find out the location that Alex and Sharon moved from because I was trying to connect those dots. I absolutely can't believe that that is.
That's it. And I just found out about Spencer on Thursday and I reached out to him yesterday and we had an hour and a half conversation. I wish he would represent me. He said no, he has his own legal counsel. And I am dying to make this known, but he said because I'm calling it fiction, I need to be careful. He said if you name Sharon and Alex, they're dead, but you can't name the people who are alive. And I don't know if he's named more people who are alive, but
Wow, oh my goodness. Because then there's Esther Friedman, who was part of the Boston branch that came after Spencer's New York branch, but your branch came before these two. So the dots that you and Spencer must be able to connect is just absolutely blowing my mind right now. I can't believe it.
he didn't know the group in California. I mean, this is crazy that the connection here is beyond anything I would have ever understood.
Yeah. When you were talking about the retreats and the manual labor and the subscription fee and the secrecy and how you were recruited in the first place, everything fell into place at that point. And I am absolutely lost for words. Even the name in the book, which is not the name of this group, I thought, oh, that it rings of this other group.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. I cannot believe this. Wow. This is amazing. I told Spencer that I was on my first podcast today, yes, yesterday, but I didn't tell him who it was
If you
with.
would have told him it was me, he'd be like, "Oh, it's the best podcast in the world." He bigs up the show to everybody. He bigs it up to everybody. I'm gonna message him right now.
Yes, tell him give him a big hello, and I will do the same. If so, ask him again if I can say yes. This is the same group.
That is the end of part 2 of this mini series. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.